Well, good morning. This is for Monday, September the 27th, and this is your Monday message. I hope it finds you having a great week, getting ready to serve the Lord and look for opportunities to be a blessing to somebody else. I wanted to bring you a passage out of Romans chapter 1 and verse 16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is God's power for salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, but also to the Greek. I am not ashamed of the gospel. I want us this week to look for opportunities to share that gospel, to share what Christ has done in our lives, to talk about Him, to talk about His goodness, to embrace those opportunities to witness to people. With that in mind, I want to share with you a true story that's often told by Ray Comfort about, they call it the story of the little man on George Street. And it is a story about a pastor who was speaking in London. And at the end of that service, someone asked if they could share their testimony. And so they began to talk about how they were in Australia, and a little white-haired man approached them and said, "Are you saved? And if you were to die tonight, would you go to heaven?" And it caused this businessman to really think about that on the flight back home. And on the whole flight, he pondered that little old man with the white hair and his words, "Are you saved? And if you died tonight, would you go to heaven?" And so he got back home and called someone that he knew was a Christian and said, "How do I get saved?" And so he was led to Christ. Well, that testimony impressed that pastor, but he went on and then later spoke at a conference in Australia. And a woman asked to share her testimony. And she said that she was visiting friends in Sydney, and she went shopping down on George Street, and a little white-haired man approached her and said, "Ma'am, if you were to die tonight, would you go to heaven? Are you saved?" And that woman was greatly disturbed and convicted about those words and what that little white-haired man had said to her. And so when she got back home, she went to a church, and she asked Jesus into her heart and got saved. So in about 2 weeks, the little white-haired man had heard two different testimonies of people that had been saved by that little white-haired man. Well, he then goes, the pastor goes to another conference and is talking, and he finds out from a group of pastors that were there, they also had encountered that little white-haired man in Australia and had encountered him on George Street and had also given their lives to Christ and then later surrendered to the ministry and became preachers. And so every time he turns around, he's encountering people that are familiar with this little white-haired man on George Street. So now he's really intrigued because he starts looking at all the connections and all the different testimonies of people that had run into the little white-haired man on George Street. In fact, he goes to India and meets Indian missionaries in India who had also been converted and saved because of this little white-haired man on George Street and his powerful witnessing that he would do. He would say, "Are you saved? And if you were to die tonight, would you go to heaven or would you go to hell?" And so he then is determined to go to Sydney, Australia, and look up and down George Street and see if he can find the man. Well, he couldn't find him, but he finds out that he is home and he is in frail health and has not been able to leave his home for some time. So he goes and visits with the little white-haired man, and he shares with him about how many people that he had encountered in a short period of time that had been saved, converted under this little man's witnessing on George Street. And this was his response to the pastor. He says, "I've done this for over 40 years, and in my retirement years, the best place to go and witness to people was on George Street because of all the foot traffic, because of all the people walking up and down George Street, hundreds of people that he encountered on a daily basis." And he told the pastor, he said, "I got a lot of rejections and got a lot of angry people. In fact, very few people would even give me the time of day." And he says, "And in over 40 years of doing this, I never heard of one single person coming to know Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior." And the pastor told him that based on his own experience and how many people that he had personally encountered in India, in Australia, and in London, he said there's got to be hundreds, if not thousands of people that are saved because of what you did on George Street. Well, 2 weeks later, that man, whose name is Frank Jenner, passed away. And imagine the reward that he received. "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." He kept witnessing, he kept sharing, for he was not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation. He just kept sharing, even though he encountered a lot of hostility and didn't know of one single convert. But they estimate thousands were saved because of the little white-haired man on George Street. Stay faithful, stay focused. God bless.